Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. I am Abe with MysticGenmara.com, a small town mystic from the middle of Idaho. And tonight we're going to go a little further back than our most recent occult and crochet and mystic topics, which was the foundation of the Golden Dawn and kind of how it came to be where it's at today. But we're going to go back further, back kind of where we started with this about a year ago with this journey, and so we're going to the early 1800s. And where we're headed is to see one of the occultists that inspired so many people throughout the foundation of the Golden Dawn, Thelema, and a great many other occultists even today. And this particular inspirational figure is Eliphas Levi, or Levi, but most of the sources I've tried to listen to said Levi, so we'll go with Levi. Eliphas Levi, who I will use his last name from here on out, was born Alphonse Louis Constant in February of 1810, Paris, France. He was the son of a shoemaker. That's pretty much what I found out. Other than his mother died when he was about 9 or 10. So, there we go. Where did the name Eliphas Levi come from when his surname was Constant? Well, I did a little foreshadow for you. The name is an anagram in Hebrew of his given name. Levi would use this name for his writings and teachings on the occult specifically. Note to self, don't drink kombucha before stream. Not much is said about Levi's young life. He would enter the Catholic Seminary of St. Sulpice in 1932. His overall goal at that time was to become a priest, which was very respectable and something you could raise yourself up out of the depths of poverty with. Says something about how churches went back in the day. He started as a subdeacon, and then he was finally ordained as a full deacon shortly thereafter. Interestingly, he would abandon this path just before becoming a full priest. And part of it is said, there's some rumors out there, that it was because of a romantic love interest, and this young lady was able to lure him from the clutches of the church. But that's just a rumor from what I could find, at least at this point. This did not make Levi's superiors happy. Can't imagine why. They reminded him of his vows of chastity and obedience as a deacon. This made his transition into non-pastoral life very difficult, just because of he was in Catholic school and seminary for so many years, because just after his mom died, that's when he went into the Catholic school system. At least that's some of what I could dig up. So he was really in there for about 8 to 10 years before leaving the seminary. So that was a lot of time to really be, kind of almost indoctrinated, you could say. And so when his superiors, the priests above him, were chastising him, it really hit him hard. He never forgot the lessons of charity, though, and he never forgot a lot of his lessons there. He claimed that his time in the seminary helped him to understand faith and science, and allowed him to see them as partners in life. They're not enemies, which I find interesting considering that the church and scientific reason have never really gotten along. But for him, there was something about how he was taught that it actually helped him understand the two concepts together. As an odd aside, just because I keep running into these little tidbits and I thought it was fun, he would continue to wear priestly robes, the cassocks, for many, many years. He finally toned down the practice in around 1844. And if you are curious, this is a photo sketch of Eliphas Levi, but it was these, the clerical type robes. He wore those consistently until 1844, and even after that he would still randomly wear them, even though he wasn't a priest. Like I said, it was something I just found interesting. Anyway, 1844, Does that date sound familiar to anyone? This is the heart of the spiritual awakening that was in full swing in the United States. And Eliphas Levi was in Europe at the time, obviously, but it was triggering a lot of ripple effects. What was going on here in the States was triggering effects far reaching into Europe. So, as I said before, there are many theories as to why Levi left the seminary. A.E. Waite, who I've talked about before, thought he was expelled for questioning authority. But that would have stripped him of his deacon status, and he wasn't stripped or kicked out of the church. Waite had a very strong hatred of the church at points in his life, and so that could just be his projection. One other theory is that he fell in love and left the spiritual path, which is one of the entertaining rumors I found. The other theory, though, that he became disenchanted with the doctrines and practices of the church and just quietly walked away. From what happens later on in his life, through his writings, and from what others have spoke about him, this seems to be the theory that I would go with personally, is that he just kind of and walked away. It wasn't hatred, it was just things changed for him. So, after leaving the seminary, I had a long day at work, sorry. After leaving the seminary, Levi needed to find employment, so he started working as a tutor in Paris. And it was during this time that he met a mystic by the name of Simon Guenot. That's a character that I might actually talk about another time because he's got an interesting history. But it is said that Simon did influence a lot of Levi's ideas, tying into this concept of Christian socialism, which doesn't work and didn't work at the time. And there were some things that I'll get to in a minute that didn't suit or didn't work out so well for Levi because of that. In 1939, Levi attempted to join a monastery, the Abbey of Solesmes, horrible names. But the strict practices would not interest him for long, and he would eventually leave the monastery. I believe he was only there for less than a year. And after the monastery attempt, Levi would return to Paris. He would write and publish a small book called The Bible of Liberty. And this is where we get into the Christian socialism thing didn't turn out so well for him. This book was so controversial at the time, and it would eventually lead him to be incarcerated in 1841 because it was very anti-government, this book was, at least the government of the time. And we'll toss a little bit of Levi's personal life in here, which I try to do just to make these people human for you. He was married in 1846, and from what I could find, it might have been a shotgun wedding. It was basically said that he was forced to marry, which, anyway, after about 7 years or so, she just decided she was done. She peaced out and joined up with the Marquis of Montferrat, and this led to the marriage being annulled in 1865 due to the fact that she cheated on him, basically. Apparently, he was quite the fertile young man in that time, and his first wife, which I couldn't find a name for her, bore many children. But, and there's always a but. As many kids as it was in between 3 and 6, there wasn't a set number. All the children passed before adulthood. I think the oldest one passed at like 10. Kind of typical of the time, but doesn't say much about, the life that they were leading at the time either. Interestingly enough, from a tryst that he had just after his wife left him, he did end up siring a child. That child's lineage, according to sources, is said to still be around today, but he never took the name Constant or Levi. He kept his mother's name, and Levi did care for his son and would go on to pay for school and take care of anything that his son needed at that time. but he never took his dad's name, which I thought was interesting, to say the least, especially in that time. But with all this marital chaos that was going on, Levi experienced a spiritual crisis and a financial headache all tied into one. And this led him to why I am talking about him today. If he was just another cleric that got cheated on back in the day, not a big deal. But there's more to him, and that's what we're getting into. As Levi's world fell apart around him, he turned to the new, quote-unquote, occult and esoteric movement that was growing through the 1850s in Europe. Of course, living in France, let alone Paris, uprisings were quite common. They still do that today. And in December of 1851, Napoleon III flipped the government upside down with a coup. And this would give birth to the Second Empire of France, ending the Second Republic, which French history, if you ever want to go on a deep dive, just take and glance through how many times there was a republic, an empire, a dictatorship, an empire, republic. Like, it's France has had its time of just total chaos. It's a weird country in that respect. Very fascinating because you get to see the ups and downs and all that stuff. But yeah, it's just, there's a lot going on there. Levi would praise the new dictatorship, the Napoleon III, in 1852. But the illusion would break shortly thereafter, and this would lead to another stint in prison in 1855. They did not say specifically why he was in prison that I could find. I found one French website, couldn't get it to translate, so not really sure what happened there. And I don't speak French. So, Levi was not impressed with the unwashed masses when he got out of prison for the second time. He thought they were not educated enough to free themselves and govern themselves fully. He held the view that during this time, a ruler class of priests, a theocracy, was the best way to go, because the masses needed spiritual guidance to live in harmony with each other. Been tried before, never works out, just FYI. All of this disappointment and spiritual challenge did leave Levi into a deeper occult search. And in the 1860s, he started his book, The History of Magic, which I have linked several of these books in the description if you're interested in digging more into what Levi wrote. I have not read the entirety of The History of Magic, but I have, just because of quotes, ended up picking it up a while back, and I've started on it. It's a little different. It's an essay type writing, so it's not as easy to read. But he is quoted, and this is where we start getting into his inspiration for future occultists, in people like Crowley. Mathers talked about him. Rigardi would talk about him. A lot of your ceremonial magicians really reference Eliphas Levi's work heavily. The time of the 1860s led to Levi's writing career taking off, and in 1861 he published his next work called The Key to the Great Mysteries. This work went over the placement of man in the spiritual world, and he had some interesting views on magic and the devil in this text. I have not read this one, I will full disclosure, but it's been quoted in massive amounts of the books that I've read. Levi would also write some novels and other occult texts, notably The Science of Spirits in 1865 and The Great Secret, or Occultism Unveiled, in 1868. The Great Secret was published after his death in 1898, oddly enough. But he'd almost completed the work, but as things, we'll get to that, but he never was able to publish it in his lifetime. Levi claimed that he wasn't selling initiation into a secret group, or that he was teaching supernatural forces, which is why I think he would mock some of the people who use his work later. He was also one of the first occultists to bring the tarot into the magic environment fully and tie it specifically to the Kabbalah. Today, we kind of, if you ever study into ceremonial magic or the Golden Dawn or any of that, tarot and Kabbalah are like best buds. They're always together. But they weren't at this time. He was the one that was able to see the pattern and bring the two-part worlds together, basically. Prior to this, the Kabbalah was its own beast. The tarot was its own world. Didn't really mix a lot. The circles that they worked in didn't mix either. But he was able to bridge that gap, which was huge. The tarot was very powerful, but it wasn't incorporated into really any magic at that time. It was its own thing. And remember, these were the days that the major arcana was fully illustrated. The minor arcana was basically a playing deck of cards. There wasn't a lot of detail. You'd have like 1 sword, 2 swords, 3 swords, 1 cup, 2 cups, 3 cups, 1 coin, 2 like it literally was just a deck of cards. But the major arcana was loosely illustrated, and it really didn't have a set structure like it does today either. So there's that. And I'll let you know about 2 of Levi's contributions to modern occultism. Basically 2. He was the first to postulate that the pentagram, with 1 point up and 2 points down, was described as good, positive white magic. And the one with 2 up, 1 down was evil, which not always the truth, but it's a negative aspect of life, is how it works out in most occultism today. And he was also the first, and this one is so entertaining if you watch a lot of horror films or occult mystic nightmare horror films, which I'm a little addicted to. Eliphas Levi was the first person to depict the sabbatical goat. Let me find that. There it is. And this has become synonymous with Baphomet. Baphomet was a supposed French deity, a goddess primarily, that was attributed to the Knights Templar. Everything ties together. And they assumed that this was his vision of the devil. Had nothing to do with that. Absolutely nothing. Eliphas Levi's belief about this particular picture right here was, as the goat man was pointing up, he was pointing at the waxing moon, pointing down in the corner, there, to the waning moon. There is, in the groin area, the catechus in a very phallic sense coming forward. And if you notice, the chest area is very androgynously large. But you also have the horns, which were classified as evil, but the wings signifying angels. The legs are crossed in a meditative state, and the star is positive up with the flame saying that this person is an enlightened being. The whole concept of the sabbatical goat was to say this is the perfect description of what spirituality is. It's light, it's dark, it's good and bad, it has to have the polarity of masculine and feminine, but it's not one, it's not the other. True spirituality, true mysticism, true magic, however you want to call it, is not universally good. It's also not universally evil. And that's what he was portraying with the sabbatical goat, was to understand the universe, you have to understand the balance of good, evil, light, dark, masculine, feminine. And that's what he developed for that. Now today, this thing has been used for everything but. They're always talking about how it's evil. It's not. Wasn't in the beginning, it's not today. It's the intention behind it that makes it good or bad. Kind of like magic, actually. Anyway, Levi's thoughts and actions towards magic and spiritualism led to many changes about magic in particular. He brought the concept of magic to spiritual development, which prior to that time was true to a point, but it wasn't verbalized and postulated properly. He worked on understanding the development of the spiritual will, the higher will, and the integration of all parts of a person's being: mind, body, soul, or spirit. Levi's writing and beliefs influenced so much of what followed with the occult community, what we would call Western occultism, basically. His works have been cited by people like Aleister Crowley, the Golden Dawn, and many, many more today. Even Helena Blavatsky and her Theosophical Society was impressed with parts of his work. Of course, she had to improve them. I don't have a lot of respect for that person. I know there's people out there that love what she did, love her work. I'm not a big fan. So I do want to actually cover her so I can find out more about her as a person. What I've read of her work so far, not impressed. Doesn't mean I won't keep reading, because I'm always willing to learn more, but that's just me. But she did, oddly enough, use a lot of reference him and thought very highly of Eliphas Levi's work. The biggest issue that I have found that people have with Levi's work is that he viewed the spiritual realm as beyond most people. I personally don't have this problem, but it's what other people have basically called him out for. He viewed that after a person died, they just disappeared. That only the most skilled magician could manipulate the energies to actually reach into the ether and pull something through. The everyday spiritualist or occultist was basically working to improve his or her spiritual life, which also elevated them in the spiritual world. And he called out the spiritualist movement in the United States, oddly enough, and those who practiced it even in Europe. He said that magic was for personal development, not supernatural occurrences. And I personally think it could be both, but he just didn't think that, sitting at home like with a crystal ball was the proper use of these type of skills. You're not doing anything in his mind to develop a person's spirit. We know today that that's not quite true, but judging by the occultism of his time, that's how he viewed people, like the Fox sisters and that whole list of people, because they weren't using the proper tools, techniques, and experiences to open up and develop their spirituality. They were using it more for show or for play. But as I said, one thing can be two different views. So, one final word from Levi himself regarding magic and its practices. And this is a quote from two of his books. Just 1 second, my phone went off. Okay, never mind. And the quote is as follows: "The operations of magical science are not devoid of danger." This is rather important, really. "Their result may be madness for those who are not established on the base of the supreme, absolute, and infallible reason." Logic and reason define most everything in magic. "They may overexcite the nervous system, producing terrible and incurable diseases," mainly mental diseases, but some of the potions and unctions that they used at the time could also cause some really bad physical problems if you didn't know what you're doing with them. So, quote, "Let those, therefore, who seek in magic the means to satisfy their passions pause in that deadly pursuit, where they will find nothing but death or madness. This is the significance of vulgar tradition, and that the devil finished sooner or later by strangling said sorcerer or sorceress." Basically what he's saying is you don't go into the spiritual pursuits, especially if you're going into the realm of magic and its branch of occultism, unless you are fully aware of the practice and the amount of preparation before you really do anything, which is why I have high respect for the Golden Dawn, because they really focus on that first. And it's partly because of his warnings in a couple of his books that they focus on that. He literally knew that people, if they would dove into stuff too far, could go mad, become possessed. If they used the wrong combination of products, they could end up having severe health issues later. And when you go after stuff for a reason of passion, not for other purposes, you end up finding death or madness. And that's been played out multiple times when you look at some of the modern day occult killers, which again, true crime's another fun one, but they have all started down this thing, just allowing their passions to dominate and not their will, and then they end up in not great places. So that's the reason he said that this vulgar tradition of following your passion, and I'm not talking like spiritual pursuit passion, like your lustful lower self ego passions, that's when the devil will just finish you off. Basically, there was reasons for that. Like I said, if you research this time period, people were dabbling with a lot and not having a clue what they were doing, and he was trying to warn the future people, spiritual pursuit first, magic is side effect, which kind of makes sense. I mean, you can go for the magic part, but you're going to have to still learn the practices beforehand. It is said that Levi reconciled with the church before he passed away and actually received last rites, which, considering his particular proclivity for occult interests, that's saying something, that the church was like, yeah, we'll still do that. Levi passed from this world at the age of 65. Really not that old for that time even, because you still had people living to 80s in that time. And he passed away in the year of our Lord 1875, in the spring month of May. I don't think there was a lot to reconcile, since he may have been disillusioned with the church, but he never strayed very far from the teachings. Even though he went down the path that he did, he still held really strong convictions within the church. Levi was in seminary for so much of his young life, so those teachings would have been ingrained basically to his bones at that point. And either way, he was given last rites. So, as is the pattern of a lot of the occultists, because their spiritual pursuit dominated their life, he died in almost poverty. His family life was not great. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I don't want to sugarcoat people who had problems, but sometimes those problems weren't all of that person's life. And that's what I'm bringing forward with this. His legacy is in his writings. That's really his children. He did have the one son, but it's his writings that have continued on and influenced such massive amounts of the Western occultism. And we can actually get to know the man, Eliphas Levi, and sit at his knee by reading his works. And there's a lot there to read, and they're a little bit high-minded, don't get me wrong, but they're not beyond what the everyday person, especially today, should be able to read. And if there's stuff that you're not understanding, that's fine. You're not ready to see that part yet. Come back to it in a couple of months, maybe even a year. Each time you read some of these older books, you learn a new aspect of that person. You learn a deeper level of the knowledge. That's the reason I keep going back to, like, the Middle Pillar from the Golden Dawn that Israel Regardie wrote, or the Garden of Pomegranates, and there's a few other ones that I keep going back to, because every time I read it again, I learn something different. It deepens the knowledge more. I don't just read them, I usually practice what's going on in there. So it's helping you develop and anchor this knowledge more so into your body, your mind, and your soul. And like I said, I linked some of his books down below. Let me know any of your thoughts if you've read any of his works so far. What was your opinion of him? And if you haven't, which one would, out of the list there, which one sounds the most interesting to you? Just something to think about. With that, I'll wrap things up here. If you are new to the stream or new to the video, please hit the subscribe button, drop a like on the video if you enjoyed this type of content, and like I said, comment below, let me know what you think about this particular topic, and if you've read any of his work or have come across his quotes in other works that you've read. Let's just keep the conversation going if we can. So I hope you guys have a great rest of your week, and I will talk to you in the next video.